Hello, I'm Doug Penn and I sell antique outboard motor parts and motors over the internet from my website. One of the most frequently asked questions I have to deal with is how do you get the flywheel off of an antique outboard motor so that you can check the ignition system, which is most often one of the problems. There are two basic types of motors that we deal with in the antique hobbyist world with outboard motors, and one is a motor similar to this. Now this has all of the properties that you have to deal with when you've got a motor of this age that you can't put a puller on. The other type of motor would be like this Elgin, which is a fully shrouded motor from the 50s. Here is a bunch of parts and tools that we have, which is the very minimum of what you will need to do the job properly. Most people don't have access to a special puller like so, but you can get a similar puller to this, which is an automotive harmonic balancing and flywheel puller from even the discount stores like Walmart have it. You will, in most cases, need a strap wrench, something very similar to this, an large adjustable end wrench, a good ball peen hammer, and a selection of wooden blocks which will be used to lever the flywheel off or to put pressure on the edge of the flywheel, and then a couple of pry bars which you will use to put pressure on the edge of the flywheel while you're trying to remove it on the early motors. It needs attention.
Okay, we're going.
When I work on these earlier motors, I like to remove everything around the flywheel so that I can get the strap wrench on it. I've taken off the gas tanks, taken out the spark plugs, and you have to remove this rope plate cover to get at the flywheel nut. This nut has to come off before the flywheel can come off. And so, if you're alone, you absolutely have to have this flywheel. You have to have some way to hold the flywheel so that you can put a wrench on it and remove the nut. Now, this particular engine has had the threads damaged by people incorrectly removing the flywheel. But as you can see, these threaded holes are simply for the screws that hold the rope plate on, and they are too small to support a puller. And the last thing in the world you want to do is to start putting pullers on the outside edge of the flywheel. That will definitely damage the flywheel. So this flywheel has to pop up, and we need to remove this washer to give it room to do that. Then we thread the nut back on, leaving enough space so that the flywheel can pop up. Then, using an assortment of wooden blocks, we get the correct height to put a pry bar on. And the trick here is you want to catch just the lip of the flywheel. You don't want to put pressure on the magneto plate. So you have to get just the edge of the flywheel. Levering it up.
You got a little bit of the plate. That's it. Now you got it.
All right. And then the other trick is to apply pressure, upward pressure, not a whole lot so that you bend the flywheel, but enough pressure, and then you hit the end of the crankshaft and the nut squarely. That's the trick, squarely. and the flywheel pops loose. There's the flywheel. Off the motor. Okay, well, now this is the second type of engine that we'll have to deal with. And these 50s, 60s, and newer motors, in fact, most of the motors from World War II on, had the provision to use a puller on the flywheel. This type of a puller, or I've been lucky enough to been able to buy this factory tool that was offered by Evinrude and Johnson, and I think some of the others. But it allows you to get the flywheel off without a strap wrench, because you can hold it. I'll show you as we get further along how that works. What we do have to do in order to get at the flywheel and to remove it is to get the tank and any of the shrouding off, so that we have the flywheel magneto exposed. So I'm going to take this stuff off and come right back to you. What you need here is to remove that nut first, then to put the puller on it. In order to remove the flywheel nut, you have to hold the flywheel. Now, if you don't have one of these strap wrenches, you can still do the job, but it has to be done with two people, one of them holding the flywheel, the other one removing the nut. But because we have the strap wrench, we'll just break the nut loose. There's usually a washer underneath. We have to get the washer out of there. Now, as I said, this is a specialized puller that was just made for this type of engine and this type of flywheel magneto. It has some 7/16 long bolts that you thread down into the receiving tapped holes on the flywheel. Now the trick here is to get this fairly even, so that when you center it and bring it up, you've got pressure equally applied. If you don't have this type of a puller and you're using a standard puller like so, then you have to hold the flywheel again with a strap wrench. Now, in this one, it's just the opposite. So what we're doing now is putting pressure on the end of the crankshaft, holding the flywheel, and tightening down until the flywheel breaks loose. Now, in some cases, you will have to put so much pressure on this that you think that you will be bending the crankshaft, and when you do that, when you tighten it down as tight as you can and the flywheel still has not popped loose, that's when you hit the end of the tightening nut, and that should give it enough to pop the flywheel loose. Once you've done that, the flywheel comes off with the puller, and it exposes the magneto. And on this particular engine, this is probably our problem. You can see that the coil, and this engine runs, it just doesn't run well, and we think that these coils, which have cracked insulation, are probably, if not the reason for the poor running, or part of it. So we've got to get at them and replace them, and the only way you can do that is to take the flywheel off. So I hope that answers some questions, and I hope that this this little effort here has made things easier for people.